We did not have a meeting last week because Al was out driving around. And so this week, or sometime in the last week, I was saying that they're going to put the Slack channel is going to be on a free pro plan for 15 days, so everybody could try out their wonderful features. And the thing I wanted was the fact that they're going to unlock all the messages back to day one, so you could view all the messages and see all the images and view all the files all the way back. So I took advantage of that and ran a full backup. And you just, if you're an administrator, you can dig through the menus and it says, I want to export data. And it says, how much do you want? Do you want the last 7 days, the last 10 days, or do you want to go, you want a complete backup? So I clicked on complete backup, and I've done this before, and it will give me the messages all the way back to day one, but all the images are blocked. If you go to Slack right now, it'll only show you messages and images back 90 days with a cute little message saying, oh, if you give us money, you can see all your messages that we're hiding from you. So anyway, I this happened on the Twin City Robotics Group, and just all of a sudden it popped up and said, oh, you're on a 60-day free trial. And I thought, well, this is my chance to find out if this will work. And I tried it there. I backed up that one and then ran it through this converter I have, and it did appear to work. I did appear to have all the stuff that should be there. So I ran it on this one, and sure enough, it did work. It gave me the full backup, which is just a zip file that's full of JSON files, which is pretty much worthless unless you have something that'll deal with that. So I downloaded this other program a while back. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Slack Export Converter or something like that. And I ran against that, and it just boom, it just said, oh, okay, you're ready to go, and it fires up. And that if you use their software, it actually starts up. And so basically live, it builds the whole thing as an HTML file. And then if you go over and click on one of the channels on the left, it will automatically switch to the next channel, and that stuff all works. But I wanted it to the point where you don't have to run that software. And I decided if I just simply click on the page and say, save this web page as, I can save out the individual. We have four channels were active all the way back. And I just saved out 4 HTML channels. And then when it does that, it takes all the images and everything and puts them into a support file. So basically, I took all that and got it working and put it out on my web page. So let me go to screen share and say screen 2. Now let's see if this is going to work. This one. So I posted this message, and let's see, these pictures are probably gonna be the way. Let me, can I do this? I'm just thinking ahead here because I know those pictures will be in the way. So this is the thing I was talking about with Al. How do you set the scroll stuff? But let's see if I do it right now. That's working fairly well. So anyway, I posted this message saying I've run the converter and I created it. It seems to work. And it says if you go to this web page here, let's see if this is going to work. No. I guess it's crap in my way now. So if I click on that, it brings up this web page. This is out of my stuff, and it lists the 2 for common, 2 for general, 2 for random, and 2 for RTK. And I was noticing, at least on I think Windows, this probably depends on your browser. See this first file, you can't tell what it says, but if you look down at the bottom, which I can't figure out how to make that text any bigger either, but it says it's a file called tractor automation Slack exports dash April 30th, April 3rd dash 2024 slash Slack export. And that's probably a space. No, it's a 23, whatever. That must be that pound sign. It says common ECU.html. So the one that the HTML is the one you want to run, and you'll notice that anyone that lists the size out here, it says 18K, 156K, 3 megabytes, or 34K. Those are the files you can display. So if you just click on that's the HTML file for common, and it pulls it up and looks like this. I'm going to move these images, but I don't think it actually moves them on the recording. So we'll see what happens here. So it brings it up, and there's your channel for common ECU. And it does go back to so this channel was created later. This doesn't go back to day one, but it goes back to 2022. And this thing's only got about 6 messages in it. It's just what's his name? Alan, not Alan. Ross. Ross is saying these are some requirements he wants to put on. He wants to build a custom controller, and these are the requirements that he was thinking about he could use, and just asking our people what they want to do. And then I was pointing out some comments comparing it to the Danfoss controllers, and here's some pictures of Danfoss controller. So this shows it does have the images in there back at least to 2022. And then he says if he gets some time, he'll talk about it more. And then that was Bob saying, what is this for? Then he said, if I get some time, I'll talk about it later. And that was the end of this channel. So it was like 1 or 2 days of activity. And now you can't come over here and click on, say, random, because when you do, it'll pop up and say this. It says this site can't be reached. It thinks there's supposed to be underlying software that's controlling all this. And I threw all that out and just saved the individual pages. So it says it can't reach that site. It's trying to get to localhost port 5000 with a channel called random. So what you do instead is back up to here. And I got more stuff in my way again. Let's say duplicate this. Back up here. So what I can do is I can just come open and say general. And then I can duplicate that. And back up and say random. So now I can just I've got them all. I got 3 of these open at once here. And things are running really slow here. I must be out of memory. And see, there are images in these. And so basically it's a good equivalent of the original Slack channel. So last week when we were on our free trial, you could see all this stuff live, and you could use their search tools and everything. Right now, if you do a search, you're just using a browser search. And so if you know what to look for, you type it in and it'll come down to that point and you can see what it is. I don't like the fact that their date and times are grayed out to the point where, depending what computer and what monitor you're on, you can't read the damn things. But somebody thought that was a good idea, so that's what they did. So anyway, that stuff is available in out in let's back up here. I'll put a link to this in the description so you can find it. But basically, when you click on that link in the description, it'll take you to this page, and you can just click on these pages and open them up just like I'm doing right now. And that should work for everybody, I'm hoping. Now, if you decide you want a copy of this for yourself, let's see, I can't back up there. Let's get back to here and come down. So the rest of my post says, if that's working for you and you want, you can go out to click on this link, and that's the zip file of that directory. So if you click on that and download it, I guess, so it's got a fast internet now. Let's try this and see what it does. La, 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 la. What did it do? Okay, so I think it downloaded it. Where's how do I get to my files like this? If I say downloads, and what was that called? It's called tractor automation something. And now, Al, now I've got my scroll thing like I want. It takes forever to scroll all the way to the bottom. The other thing we were talking about earlier was I didn't like the way the scroll wheel works on either Windows or Linux. Well, now, of course, I can't find that file I just downloaded. So maybe we won't do this live to prove it. But anyway, you should be able to just download that zip file, put it on your computer and unzip it. And then you should be able to do the same thing. You'll have everything back to day one on your own computer, and you can just click on it and it should work. So that's all I got to say about it at the moment. Oh, I was telling Al earlier, we could go on, once a month and back this stuff up, but they don't seem to have any way to append this stuff together. So I can't create one big file of everything. But we got one that goes back 2 or 3 years, and we could just have small ones that are about a month in size. And I don't plan to maintain that. I might go to the trouble each month to download it because that doesn't take that long, and then not, I won't expand it out and try to build anything. So, well, if I don't do that, I might lose all the images. So maybe I would have to just go do the extra step to do that. So that's just something going on in the background that this may or may not. I think this would be useful to people because if you want to go back, I was just scrolling through. There's all kinds of interesting stuff we were talking about. It's just whether or not anybody wants to go the trouble of doing that, I guess. Let me do this. Let me say stop sharing. Oh, I guess I should have asked Al if he has any questions before I stop sharing because
You told me earlier, I think it's worth noting that it was the download zip file was about 40 megabytes.
I think it was, yes. And
So it's not extraordinarily huge if somebody's interested in keeping an offline copy.
if you got a fast connection, that's it just pops right up. But if you've got back when I had DSL, that probably would have taken me. It might have taken me 10 minutes or so. I think a 40 megabyte file. I know when I was doing the YouTube downloads originally to get the ROS agriculture stuff, those would take, you know, 20 minutes to 2 hours a piece, and I had to do 250 of them. And so that was a pain. But now I got fast internet. I'm like the elitist. Oh, I don't care how big it is. I'll just transfer anything. So, but if you wanted, that's just the way it works. So you can access them directly on my web page just by clicking the links. And I don't plan to delete that stuff, but if I drop dead, then you won't have it anymore. So if you want to download that directory to your computer, then number one, you don't even have to be on the internet at that point. You just open up that directory and click on one of those, and it'll pop up, and there they are. So that's may or may not be handy to people.
Anything else, Jeff?
Nothing I think of at the moment.
By the way, I was about to click the share button and I noticed in the share button there's a option on the right hand side. It says share sound. So we were talking earlier about sharing sound, and that might do the trick if you were interested in. But we're not going to do that because we don't want to get
Due to
YouTube.
copyright violations.
Yeah, we don't get YouTube yelling at us. Keeping on the theme of Slack, Bob had posted a question about 3D printing, and I had replied to that in Slack, but I didn't have some YouTube links ready when I wrote that. So thought I would just cover a couple of those or three of those in this setting. And since Bob is usually pretty good about watching this, he'll be able to see that. And Jeff has also got the links in the chat. So um, in no particular order, these this is one of the videos. This happens to be quite actually an old video. But the reason I pulled it up is because this guy, he goes by the handle 3D printing nerd. Fabulous, in my view, fabulous a guy with a lot of content, and you can go far and deep watching his videos talking about 3D printing. The other one, this teaching tech individual, for me anyway, again, another really good uh, channel to spend some time on if you're interested in learning 3D printing. And then the final one that I'll just mention is the guy with the handle Maker's Muse. This particular video I think is useful too because 3D printing is sort of an outcome, but the input is the design. And unless you're just going to print models that other people give you, like if what you download off a site like Thingiverse, I mean, that's a pretty limited view of 3D printing. And so I spent most of my time if you look from start to finish, uh, you might print something 5 times to get the design right, but printing is really the easy part. That's the design. Um, and so for me, I have things like the holder for the potentiometer, for the steer angle. There's a couple of gears there that's fastened to the potentiometer that turns when the steering turns. I've got microcontrollers on mine, and I don't know that this is very resilient, but at the moment, um, microcontrollers that are capturing the left and right wheel odometry, and there's a number of 3D components that facilitate that. Um, Even as simple as, a customized wiring harness to hold wires, or to hold the antenna, or I don't have it here handy, but my radio control unit is bespoke. And by that, I mean customized. And, that fixture is 3D printed. Those weren't designs that I pulled someplace. I kludged those together. And so this video is particularly, I think, interesting because it talks about the modeling software. So anyway, that's just a little bit more, Bob, or anyone else, about um, some useful folks to listen to or watch to talk a little bit about 3D printing. More specifically to my status at the moment.
Let me interrupt for a moment there. But you can make the point that you can go out and get 3D CAD software and play with it and learn it without ever having a 3D printer. You can figure out, say, I want to make a thing like he talked about having a pot, a bracket to hold his potentiometer. Just think up something like that, then play with the software and go ahead and design it up. And if it looks like it's something, because my problem is I can never keep up the ambition to learn something like that. You get into it, it seems awfully complicated. And if I don't have something something that needs made, I tend to not want to continue through with it. So rather than going out and buying a printer first and then try to track down software to do your design, you might want to just go through these ones about the 3D modeling software and see, get that and try to run it and see if it's going to be what you want. So I think that would maybe save you a lot of money on buying a printer if you decide then you're not going to buy a printer afterwards. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, it's a very good point. And I will actually say it triggers for me my very first 3D print. I happened to be living in Houston at the time, and there's a wonderful library in the south side of Houston, Clear Lake, I think. And they had a 3D printer, and more importantly, they had a guy there that could explain it. So you might have access to a 3D printer in some sort of public setting. And it's, for me, a lot of things are about the support that you get around it, because you can fight like heck for a long time trying to figure it out on your own. But if you have somebody who's done it before, obviously it goes a whole lot faster. Moving on. So as far as status for me, a couple things just to point out. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking about using, and I don't know why that's not showing, but it's coming up. Yeah, using a stepper motor mounted on a slide rail, and reducing the heat. And Jeff gave me some suggestions on how to reduce the heat, which I applied. And bottom line is I don't know that I'm ever going to get where I want to get to using this steering, or what's this thing called? Stepper motor. Just didn't have any power whatsoever, but at least I spent a little time on trying to figure that out. What I have spent time on
Uh, as,
recent,
as far as power on that motor, I noticed it was some kind of a micro stepping driver that you have. You can play with the number of steps. It could be if you say just do one step per command as opposed to doing a bunch of little steps. You know, it could be you get more torque one way or the other. So that's something else you could play with. And I know you pulled up the controller before, it had a bunch of switches on it, and it was telling you, how can you set the controller to do different things. You might just experiment with different number of steps that the thing will generate and see if that improves the way the motor works.
Roger that.
Because otherwise, then they want you to turn the current up, which then it gets hot. So that's the other alternative.
This is a picture of my base station that's at a friend's place. And what I have spent time on is re because I moved the base station, because I put something in the ground for this to always be able to be mounted in the same place. I have to go back and remap. That's probably a strong word. Um, Redrive the perimeter of the yard and build the mission. So that's sort of my next step. And I just
If
took a
if you go back to the last picture again, I see you've got just a car battery sitting on the ground with alligator clips on it. Is there anything to prevent reverse connection of those? Do you have a diode in between there anywhere?
no diode. The only thing that would prevent it is this is red. It goes
Yeah,
positive.
yeah. But before you do that, you might want to put a diode in series with the incoming 12 volts, and that way, if you hook it up backwards, hopefully you're not going to blow out your $2,000 board.
Yeah, that's a good point. So um anyway, not very complicated. It is, as Jeff said, the board, the GPS is actually this unit itself, and the rest is a development board. And then since it's the base station, it's sending out correction data. The correction data is going to this UART being fed into this 3DR radio that doesn't have a wrapper around it. And so I haven't mounted the antenna outside. So I'm sure at some point that'll give me, that inhibits the strength of the signal somewhat. But anyway, what was besides sort of the structure and physically mounting it in one place, the new piece of information is that I've got, the Latin lawn of that hole in the ground where this is positioned. And so every time it fires up, it thinks it's at that position. And yesterday I drove, the perimeter and captured a bag file of that. And so my next step is to take that bag file, and this was in previous runs, and this is not yesterday's run, but I've got a slide deck here where I run the perimeter, and then I've got some software that creates the points and lets me change the degrees. And so I've got to go through all that again. And, I know people are probably better at programming and organizing than me, but the reality is I got to go find I tag on programs that I did all that with because I don't remember exactly how I did all of that. But I know I've got some utilities out there, and I'll go dig those up and ultimately go back through this process of
Did you do this on a Windows machine or a Linux machine?
this particular slide deck.
Uh, the tools that you use to create your path. You're saying you had various tools that you use, but you don't remember what they are.
Well, the tools are, I mean, this is my GitHub, and there's a
Oh,
folder out here called ROS Bag Utilities. And so out of this list of whatever 30-ish items, I've got to go find the right ones to.
so back to the question: Did you run these on your Windows machine or your Linux machine?
Oh, these would have all been run on the Ubuntu machine, the Linux machine.
Okay, if you go to Linux and you type in from the command line, type in history, it'll give you like the last 2,000 things you typed in. And that way, if you have one of these names. So if you say history, pipe that to grep and put it in one of these names, it'll show you where in the history file you executed that. Now the history file only goes back so far. So if you don't regularly save that, you may have happened long enough ago that you won't have it anyway. But that's a handy way to find out, because you go to the history file and says, oh, you typed in change directory here. You said copy this file, and it says run this program. So basically, you got the steps in order there of what you were doing. And if
Should
nothing
be a
else,
for
it just kind of reminds you of what you need to do.
yeah, you should be a forensic accountant. You could like do all that research. And all of that works great until you do two things wrong, which I have done both things wrong. I haven't saved that history, and I had to rebuild my um, Ubuntu machine. And yeah, so that history only goes back 200 statements at the moment. So
Is it because it goes back to the first thing you typed in, or is it set to only save 200? Because mine saves like 1,000 or 2,000 or something. And there somewhere there's a number. I think you can change that how much you want it to save.
yeah, I rebuilt my machine in December, and it goes back all the way to December. And since
Okay.
December, on my tractor Ubuntu machine, I've only typed in 200 statements.
So so what you need to get in the habit of doing is just occasionally, whenever you think about it, just type in history with a greater than sign to say redirect this to a file, and then type history and then put the date. And then you run that, it'll take your entire history file and save it under that file for you. So if you're like me and try to not ever update your computer, I can have, like 20 or 30 of these on my computer from, the last 5 years or whatever it was. So and then it'll say, oh, okay. I say, oh, I never think to save that way. You just need to get in the habit of saving that, because that's a handy thing to have.
Where were you last Thanksgiving?
Uh,
I'm just teasing. And the reason I know that, um, I'll say I must have rebuilt it on the 5th of December. Yeah, because uh, when I rebuilt the machine, I'm trolling through my workspace for the tractor, and this particular package, I've added a number of Python programs, and one of the things that I've had to do in the last week or so is reset the execution status of some of these Python programs, because I started my big launch file and it was blowing up. And by blowing up, I mean it couldn't find these Python scripts, or they weren't executable. And that's because when I rebuilt from GitHub, it didn't pull down the executable permissions. So I had to go add those back. Anyway, every day is a little bit of a, you got every day's a little bit of a challenge. So my next step is to, as I mentioned, take the ROS bag file that I've got, which includes both lat long information as well as X and Y data, and pull the X and Y coordinates off the pose statements. Visualize that, figure out which of those, makes for my perimeter, and then pseudo adjust that. And then once I get the XY perimeter, I'm happy with the XY perimeter, I can rebuild my path and get back to proper proper testing.
so what are you using to extract your XY coordinates from that previous picture you had?
Some unknown Python program that's listed in here. I think it's the
So you just start up a program and it spits out the numbers. Because I was going to say, otherwise pull it up with Plot Juggler, and then you can, drag the slider back and forth so you can see. It shows you where you are on the path, and then it'll list out. You go look at your numbers on the left. It'll tell you your XY coordinates. So if you're going to do it manually, you just need a few points. You can do it that way.
yeah, and that doing it manual, that's a good idea. If I was going to do like a box, a really um If I was just going to do a box, I could do that. Um, but I've got some curves here that I was trying to accommodate for, and so um, this these ultimately take a CSV file. I used to list the daggone. I don't seem to have listed the program that I used on all these, but the input file at the moment is a CSV file, and it might have, 1,000 points around this outer perimeter. But yeah, but the quick and dirty solution would just be do a box with, I don't know, 6 or 8 points. The other thing I was going to mention is, yeah, that looks like a linear actuator. Um, when I was in Texas, I pulled this out of the barn, and I'm going to clean it off and retest this. It's got that JRK motor controller, and this is one of the longer ones that I own. But anyway, I pulled that out of the it was just sitting there on the shelf, but there's a lot of dust in the barn, so spend some more time looking at one of these linear actuators, and the notion would be put the working end connected to the what effectively is the speed control or the transmission control, the hydrostatic transmission control. If not directly, then through some sort of cable, excuse me, cable like is used for transmission control, uh, automotive transmission control. So that's where I'm at the moment. Trying to remember what I've already learned once before, which sounds funny, but it's true.
When you get that linear actuator running, I'd like to hear back your impression of it. Does it run nice and smooth? It looks like that's the one that's got the feedback from the motor, so it knows what position it's in.
Yes.
On the controller, do you give it like an RC signal, or do you give it like a direction? And how does that? How do you talk to that controller? Or do you remember?
My recollection is, drove it through a microcontroller and gave it what looked like the PWM signal for a RC servo. So 0 to 496, you say go to 2500, it goes to basically, midpoint.
So the other thing is you could take one of those little square controllers you buy for $3 that's meant to run an RC servo. You could plug that into it and just turn the knob on that and run the thing in and out. I assume that should work too, because it should just be a standard signal
Yeah,
that
I've got one of
you're
those.
running
So
it.
it would make it a little bit easier.
And basically, since you've already got an RC servo on your transmission right now, basically you can use the same, basically take out that RC servo and put this thing in acting like an RC servo, and that should give you, close to what you want. You have to change all the numbers, change the ranges or whatever, but that seems like that should be a fairly easy way to do that.
Yeah, I could pull up the diagram on. It's like looking from something that was just in Mars. uh, Powers. Yeah, not many. It was pretty simple. But I'll dig up my
Yeah, the problem I had, I got
servo
one of the
tester.
I got one of the linear actuators, and I did put out the extra money to get the feedback. But when I tried to run it, since it had 5 wires all bundled in a cable, and I was trying to use a PWM to drive the motor, that created enough noise into my feedback that it wasn't usable for what I was doing. It could be if I go to a much higher frequency PWM, that would cause less induce less noise into the feedback signals, or I could just strip the cable back and separate out the two power wires, then separate out the three pot wires, and that probably would fix it well enough that I could go ahead and use it. But that's what I ran into. I just curious if that thing is smart enough to maybe put enough filtering on. If you filter it hard enough, it'll get rid of any extra noise generated by a PWM signal. And I'm assuming that board is going to generate a PWM to drive that motor, but that's just a guess on my part. That's why I was curious. Does it run nice and smooth, or does it hiccup, or jitter or anything like that? So
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've used it, but you heard it. I mean, so it wasn't whisper quiet, but it was smooth. And I know I had it at one point in time. I used it to test driving the clutch on a John Deere tractor, and that was, I never put a luggage scale on it, but I'm going to say 20 pounds of pressure. I mean, it was decent amount of pressure it was pulling against actually. Anyway, that's what I got for today.
and over time, I keep suggesting that possibly on something like, say, in your transmission control, it'd be nice to put a latch in between there. So you've got your actuator, and then you got your arm on your arm on your transmission, and your transmission has a spring built into it. So if you release your tension, that thing's going to snap back to the stop position where it needs to be. And so I was saying at one point, if you had something like an RC servo, it'd be handy if you put a latch in between there. So you maybe have to move the servo to the point where the latches in, and then you can go ahead and then run the thing back and forth all you want, and then give it an electrical signal to release the latch, and then the servo can move like this, but the transmission will stay at the stopped position. I kept thinking, what would be a reasonable way? Because one thing, you could put like an electromagnet to hold the two, or maybe have a mechanical, some kind of mechanical thing that, let's see, kind of something that grabs like that, and then have like an electromagnet that will pop that open, and that way they'll move separately. And the other day I was getting in my car, and I realized the way the locks work on the car, it's got the handle, so you pull the handle to unlatch the door, and if the thing's locked, you can pull on it and it moves, but it doesn't actually connect to anything. And then if you go to move the lock knob, what do you call that? The little thing that locks or unlocks the door,
Hmm.
you can move that. And it seems like there's something about that. I thought, hey, that might work to do that kind of thing. So I was thinking maybe car parts that aren't meant to do any of this stuff maybe could be reused to make something like that. So
Hmm.
anyway, that the whole point about putting a latch on that is the fact that if you get to the point where your thing that's moving it isn't fast enough, but you decide no, it's got to stop right now, that what you can do is, instead of saying let's take an extreme and say it takes 3 seconds to go from here all the way up to full speed, and then when you go to stop, it takes another 3 seconds to stop. Well, you can move a long distance in that 3 seconds. But if you had that latch on there, you move it up like this, and it says, okay, we're moving at full speed, and then just activate the latch, it goes bang, and your transmission would immediately go back to a stopped and locked up position. So from a safety standpoint, that might be a way to address that. So
Yeah,
over time, I've been trying to think of what kind of latch could you use to do that.
and what would be even more fun about that is you would get to be able to say, "Blow the latch."
Yeah, yeah. Well, they always have the stories where they put an e-stop on a tractor or something, and so somebody's run by remote control, and they say when the guy's foolish enough to not put a seatbelt on, they would click that, and bang, the tractor would just stop immediately, and the guy'd go flying. So yeah, of course, everybody thought that was real funny. So that's, yeah. Anyway, people could be thinking about that if there's some clever way to do that, and decide if in your own implementation if you need something like that.
That's it for me today.
Okay.